What's up, all my Jaguars out there, and welcome to another epic episode of Ralph's Universe, the Reboot. But that's pretty much obvious, don't you think? Let's do it. I recently received tragic news about the Ultimate Warrior, and it really caught me off guard. And it really threw me off. As about most of you Jaguars already know, that I am a huge wrestling fan, and I've been following the sport of wrestling for a real long time. Ever since I was a young kid. I am a big fan of the Ultimate Warrior. So you know that the news of his untimely death has really rocked me. I mean, I am really affected by his passing away, even though I didn't know James Hellwig, aka the Ultimate Warrior, personally. I am most definitely upset about his passing. I had watched him and followed him for a long time throughout his wrestling career. Now, of course, I can only speak for myself, but I really get the feeling from watching videos on YouTube that are recently being made about the Ultimate Warrior that an awful lot of people are greatly affected by this news. Most definitely the entire WWE universe. So in this episode of the Reboot, I want to discuss my thoughts and feelings about the character of the Ultimate Warrior, the man behind the Ultimate Warrior, and his working relationship with Terry Bollea, aka the Immortal Hulk Hogan. I am going to be very real on this subject like I am on all of the other subjects that I touch on. No punches will be pulled. I know that it's been a long time since I've talked about or covered any subject that has to do with wrestling. The reason for that is because of factors beyond my control. But rest assured, I will be taking back control. BTW. This unique subject will be in about 2 or 3 parts. Here is part 1. All wrestling fans can agree that there are lots and lots of interesting characters in pro wrestling. Most of them are so outrageous that they have grown to become legends. And the Ultimate Warrior is most definitely one of them. Before the PG era, before the Attitude era, before the new generation of the WWF, there was the era of Hulkamania. That is when the Ultimate Warrior made his debut. I remember being a young kid on Saturday mornings, eating pizza and watching WWF superstars on TV. Yes, I used to eat pizza in the morning. I know, not very nutritious, but hey, I know better now. Back to the story. One Saturday morning when I was eating pizza while watching WWF superstars on TV, I saw this guy in color-coordinated face paint, tights, and boots making his wrestling debut. The high impact moves and the strength that he was displaying in the wrestling ring really got my attention, and OMG, I was really hooked. He called himself the Ultimate Warrior, the Warrior for short, and that name I felt was very fitting for him. To me, back then, the Ultimate Warrior came off as a superhero with a maniacal edge, as Hulk Hogan put it in the now popular DVD title, The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. I, along with everyone else, was really impressed by the exploits, adventures, and storylines of the Ultimate Warrior. it wasn't too long that the Ultimate Warrior's popularity would grow in the WWF. The fans would talk about him a lot and just go nuts whenever the Ultimate Warrior would enter the arena to battle his opponents in the squared circle. Now, as far as his wrestling goes, many of the experts talked about the Ultimate Warrior's in-ring performance and basically picked it apart in the DVD that I just mentioned, The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. They said stuff like the Warrior didn't know a lick about wrestling, he was sloppy in the ring and unprofessional. They also said that the only thing good about the Ultimate Warrior's in-ring performance was his high-impact moves and clotheslines, but everything else wasn't good. Those were the comments of the wrestling trainers. Well, I really enjoyed watching the wrestling matches of the Ultimate Warrior. I thought he was real good in the ring. In fact, the Ultimate Warrior was mother effing epic. Don't just take my word for it. If you want to know how good the Ultimate Warrior was in the ring, you can either ask the fans of the WWE Universe or watch the legendary battles of the Warrior in the squared circle yourself and judge for yourself. Another thing where I felt that the Ultimate Warrior was really misunderstood was his promos and personal interviews. In wrestling, you have to have a unique character, and it definitely helps to have an outrageous character in the WWE. You see, back then in the era of Hulkamania, however, I get the feeling that people were not ready for and probably not feeling a guy that was as intense as the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior was really intense, and the other trainers, producers, and other wrestlers and the staff of the WWF were not ready for that breed of wrestler. And that is just now hitting me. What a concept. OMG. The Ultimate Warrior's storylines were very popular. In fact, it even often would rival Hulk Hogan's storylines and adventures. I feel like after the Ultimate Warrior became the Intercontinental Champion, his storylines and matches just got even better. And at that time, with Hulk Hogan being the World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Champion and the Ultimate Warrior being the Intercontinental Champion, the WWF was really on top and beating out those other competing wrestling organizations and company. And I, like many others, was really cool with that, since I was and still am a fan of both the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. So when they actually teamed up to take on two bad guys in wrestling, of course bad guys are called heels, I was very excited. And then the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan had to battle each other for their belts. I was like, oh man, please don't do this to me. And I'm sure the other fans of the WWF had that same reaction too. This was definitely the first time two good guys, baby faces, would battle each other in the wrestling ring. At first the fans and I were stunned by this, but then we had to accept the fact that the Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan was going down at WrestleMania 6. And everything was on the line, including both the heavyweight title and the Intercontinental title. First time ever that happened. That rivalry of the Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan, I felt was definitely epic. Of course, with the help of the WWF staff and writers included, they were able to pull it off. You know, they rolled the dice, they pulled it off, and the main event at WrestleMania 6 was a hit. The match itself, The Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan, OMG, that match was so mother effing epic. Definitely the greatest match ever for Hulk Hogan and The Ultimate Warrior. It is a classic now, and I don't think any other two wrestling gladiators can even come close to topping that or even duplicating that match of The Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. The match was real close in the end, and it was The Ultimate Warrior that won that match and became the new WWF Heavyweight Champion. The Warrior was the first one ever to hold both the Intercontinental title and the Heavyweight title until he turned in the Intercontinental belt. After that, the Ultimate Warrior would go on to defend his newly won Heavyweight Championship belt and other great, now legendary rivalries. Later, the Warrior and Hulk Hogan did battle again in the squared circle of World Championship Wrestling, WCW for short, at Halloween Havoc. I personally thought that match was real good, but of course the experts thought differently. The experts like Mean Gene Okerlund said that Hulk Hogan versus the Warrior at Halloween Havoc wasn't good at all. Not really a surprise to me. I knew they wouldn't be able to duplicate their epic match at WrestleMania 6, let alone top it. No one may even come close to topping that match. I have a feeling that it's etched in wrestling history. Now let's talk about the man that was behind the Ultimate Warrior, the Warrior for short. James Hellwig is his real name, but for some reason I just like to call him Jim. I don't know why. It might just be a habit. Anyways, James Hellwig first started out as one of the Blade Runners tag team in the WCCW wrestling organization with Steve Boredom years earlier. Of course, as most wrestling fans know, Steve Boredom would become Sting years later in WCW. When Jim came to the WWF, the promoters and trainers wanted to start James out as the Dingo Warrior. But obviously there was no intention on Jim to keep that name. Because personally, I'm not really a big fan of the name the Dingo Warrior, mainly because I have no idea what a Dingo Warrior is. It most certainly wouldn't be good enough for me to use in any of the fictional stories that I write. Now, the Ultimate Warrior, that name right there is so much better. I feel like it really goes with the whole image of his outfit. Like I mentioned before, the color-coordinated face paint matching the tights and boots that Jim wore to the ring. And with that image, he really looked like a warrior, the Ultimate Warrior. I feel like the character of the Ultimate Warrior was a great success. In fact, it was so mother effing epic. And James Hellwig did play a major part of that, but at least some credit will have to go to the staff, writers, producers, and the Warriors' opponents. And the rest of the staff of the WWF. The way I see it, they all made it happen. They all were able to put that together and put on an epic wrestling show for all of their audiences. They all made it happen. All the credit can't just go to any one person. It was a combined effort. Again, I want to go back to the DVD that the staff made about the Ultimate Warrior. It's titled The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. I saw this on YouTube and I watched it from beginning to end. And I'm going to be real with you all and just call it like I see it. Actually, like I saw it. In this DVD called The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, where the staff of the WWE attempted to tell the origin story of the Ultimate Warrior. And they did do that. But they also said a lot of harsh things about the Warrior, including criticizing his in-ring performance. For example, they said things like he didn't know a lick about wrestling, and I'll quote what Bobby the Brain Heenan said. He said that he didn't care how he lifted you up. He just did it any old way and didn't care about your safety. And then John Pierre Levesque, aka Triple H, who is now the COO of the WWE, said that the Warrior was one of the most unprofessional guys in the business that he ever met. In that classic DVD, The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, they also really picked apart the Warrior's promos. The Nature Boy Ric Flair said that he couldn't remember anything memorable about the Warrior's interviews because he never said anything memorable. Heenan said that the Warrior just couldn't do an interview. WWE Hall of Famer Sergeant Slaughter said that the Ultimate Warrior often talked about being in outer space, in a space shuttle. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon said that the Warrior spoke in tongues. Chris Jericho said that he couldn't understand what the Warrior was saying, but it sounded cool. Okay, some nice criticism. And they also talked about the promo that the Ultimate Warrior did on Hulk Hogan just prior to their match at WrestleMania. I remember this one, and I'll probably never forget it either. Take my word for it, if you weren't there, this promo is a classic Jaguars. I really like Christian's imitation of the Ultimate Warrior, talking about taking control of Hogan's plane and putting it into a nosedive. That was epic as well. I don't know about everyone else. These experts kept saying that they couldn't understand what the Ultimate Warrior was saying in his interviews and promos, but I listened as the Ultimate Warrior spoke about his upcoming foes, and I understood exactly what the Warrior was saying. Now, I'm not claiming to be the sanest guy on the planet, but being an epic artist and someone who constantly creates fictional characters, writes fictional stories, and puts together insane comic books, I understand that it really helps to have an outrageous imagination to create a unique character, most definitely in the professional wrestling business. You have to get the audience's attention, even if it means grabbing them by the throat. It's those things that gets ASS's in those wrestling seats in the stadium and get people talking. And I believe that is what Jim did when he created the Ultimate Warrior, or have a hand in it. This is an epic and unique character, a wrestling superhero with a maniacal edge, and there's no doubt about it. The Warrior may be strange to some people, normal people, that is, but judging by the reaction of the fans of classic WWF, the Ultimate Warrior idea worked, and it worked well. The Ultimate Warrior is one of the reasons why the WWF is and always has been so huge, thus making WWE so successful. So even the critics has to recognize that. Behind the scenes of all this, James Hellwig didn't always get along with the other wrestlers and staff of the WWF, and I already explained all that earlier in this episode of the Reboot. Yeah, it's pretty apparent that Jim often butted heads with a few of the wrestlers back in the era of Hulkamania. Bobby Heenan talked about Jim working with the late great and legendary Andre the Giant. Heenan said that there were times when Andre was really frustrated with James Hellwig when they would practice and rehearse for their wrestling matches. According to Heenan, James was not performing the moves right, nor was he doing the clotheslines right. Now, I'm just wondering, if these words didn't come out of Andre's mouth, then how can Bobby say that Andre was frustrated, working with the Warrior? I mean, is Heenan a mind reader? No one knows what Andre was thinking or feeling. I just feel like Heenan was just putting words in Andre's mouth, and that's just not right. Come on now. And then the staff went on to talk about a bunch of other things that they were frustrated with James Hellwig. They talked about how James supposedly tried to, quote-unquote, hold Vince McMahon up for a large sum of money. And I'm sure all of you die-hard wrestling fans know about this situation. James Hellwig wanted to increase his pay rate. They had a scheduled match, The Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter, Abdullah, and the Sheik, with Sid Justice as the special guest referee. And just before the match, that is when James decided to tell Vince that he wasn't going out there to perform unless Vince, pays Jim more money. Both the Hulkster and Slaughter said that they understood that James wanted a raise because there were times when the other wrestlers wanted raises too, but that wasn't the way to do it. Now, I saw the DVD on YouTube just like everyone else did, and we know about the events that transpired at that time and what was said by each person. Now, Terry Bollea, aka Hulk Hogan, did say that he wanted to take James Hellwig into the back and straighten him out old school. And even Slaughter said, break his leg. That's what Terry said to do. Wait a minute, hold up. Break his leg? First of all, what the F is that all about? Second, if you break his leg, he won't be able to perform in the ring. Wow, you're really making a lot of sense there, guys. Then Vince said, no, I don't need a lawsuit on top of all this. Yeah, no SHIT. And Vince said that he would handle it, and he agreed to the Warriors' demands to get him to just go out there and save the show. Now, after the show, Vince, did pay Jim what he agreed to pay him, but then he fired the Ultimate Warrior, which I can agree with, because if I was Vince, I would probably fire James Hellwig too for doing that, mainly because if he does this once, then he'll definitely do it again. And I wouldn't be able to have him here doing this SHIT. So he would have to go. And I think Vince also did the right thing by paying the Ultimate Warrior what he agreed to pay, because you have to be a man of your word. I just feel like that is very important in a world like this. You have to put it out there that you can be trusted and you're a person of integrity. So that was the right thing to do, in my opinion. Then years later, Vince showed that he was a guy of second chances by rehiring and bringing the Ultimate Warrior back during the 90s of the WWF, new generation. I witnessed the Warrior's return, and for me it was epic, but there were a few problems. Other people had, problems, working with James Hellwig again, and it just included, match preparation and staging for the shows. I already mentioned, Triple H's experience with James, but then WWE Hall of Famer Jerry the King Lawler said that he also had trouble working with the Ultimate Warrior. And from what I can tell, they had trouble agreeing on how to put on a match. One wanted to go this way, and the other wanted to go the other way. For example, James Hellwig wore the baseball cap, and that just threw Jerry Lawler way off. The one thing that the staff noticed about the Ultimate Warrior's return was that the popularity that he had in the late 80s, the Warrior didn't have that this time around. They tried to recapture that magic, but they just couldn't do it. Keep in mind now, this is the new generation of the WWF, not the era of Hulkamania. By this time, Hulk Hogan was gone, and so were the other classic wrestlers from back in the day. And in this new generation, the WWF had a whole new audience as well as wrestlers. So it's only natural that these new fans wouldn't be feeling the Ultimate Warrior. In addition to the other issues of the Warrior, the tensions really rose when Jim wouldn't show up to wrestling shows when he was supposed to, or as they put it, show up as advertised. And when the Warrior didn't show up as advertised, that caused a lot of problems. I can understand that, of course. This is a job, and if you're scheduled to be there at a certain time, then that's when you need to be there. So there's no defense for James there. He didn't show up when he was supposed to. So he's most definitely wrong. It is what it is. Then James said that his dad had passed away, and Vince did confirm that was true. But then Vince went on to say that James Hellwig hadn't known his dad for a long while. When does that have to do with anything? I mean, if his dad passed away, then that's a good reason to be out, right? But then again, the Warrior should have notified the staff of the WWF, but he didn't, and that is what caused all the friction. Then the Warrior was asked to present an appearance bond promising to show up when advertised. He didn't, so the Ultimate Warrior was fired from the WWF again. Actually, James Hellwig probably quit his job before he was fired. So the Ultimate Warrior wasn't fired, he quit the WWF.